I know that we're now in January, but we need to do a final reading wrap up of the year. So buckle up because I'm going to be telling you about the 7 books that I read in December, along with what they're about, why I rated them out of 5 stars, and what I liked and disliked about them. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. I'm Katerina. It is lovely to see you here. I make weekly videos talking about books, and if that's something you're into, why don't you consider subscribing? Alrighty, let's begin. So the very first book I read last month was The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober, which is a memoir by Catherine Gray. It doesn't take a genius to work out what this book is about, considering the title, but it's essentially the author's journey from her deep alcohol addiction into her long-term sobriety. She explores the science of addiction along with societal norms and pressures to drink, but mainly focusing on the positive aspects that giving up drinking alcohol can have on your mental and physical well-being. It's a very honest and at times hilarious memoir that discusses sobriety, and I gave this book 4 stars. No one wants to admit it, but in this country, being the UK, it is full of alcoholics. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that I have been bullied numerous times into buying a pint, even when I didn't really want one, just to avoid being bullied further. And I like that the author addresses this struggle in drinking, in the fact of what other people think. And I really liked how the author was someone who literally couldn't imagine her life without alcohol, and it just kind of made her sobriety seem a lot more persuasive. It was kind of just like, well, if this woman can do it, there's literally nothing stopping me. And this author was so incredibly honest and vulnerable throughout that I was genuinely taken aback. Like, fair play to her, because I would be absolutely mortified if the whole world found out about some of the things I did when I was drunk. Coming to the things I disliked, I'm not scoring this any higher than 4 stars because I did find it get slightly repetitive at the end. Like in the last 50 pages, I was like, come on, we could have wrapped this up. And also, this is definitely a personal qualm, but I'm a big believer in moderation. I think it's good to have balance. I understand that the author has substance abuse issues, so she had to go stone cold sober, but I think that the majority of people should learn to cut back rather than cut it out completely, which I felt like the book very much endorsed the latter, to cut it out, whereas I think a little bit is okay. Although I am currently doing dry jam because Christmas drinking has ruined my liver, and I need to take a break from drinking before I get a beer belly. And speaking of bellies, that's literally the next book I read, which is Bellies by Nicola Dinan. This is a fictional coming-of-age story that is set in London and also Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and we follow 2 homosexual uni students who both meet at a drag party, both of them dressed as women. We journey with them through their vulnerable and tumultuous relationship as one of the boys begins to transition into a trans woman, and how they essentially move forward in their relationship based on that change. Despite the plot alone sounding incredible, the book unfortunately was not, and I actually only rated this 1.5 stars. On paper, this book honestly should have been everything I liked. A young romance, a coming-of-age story, LGBT topics explored, grief, death. But it was somehow one of the most boring books that I've read. The writing was just not good, everything felt very boring and flat. I felt like I was just following the speech and actions of the characters rather than understanding them themselves. It was also from dual perspectives of these 2 boys, but it never made it clear which person was talking in each chapter. You'd have to read down almost a page or 2 to recognize the surrounding characters to realize who is narrating that chapter, which just felt very messy and disjointed. You know, just state at the start of the chapter who's talking, it's not that hard. Which was another thing, there was way too many side characters. Like near the end, someone got mentioned and I was literally just like, who is that?
Hate to say it, I hope I don't sound ridiculous. I don't know who this man is.
I also just disliked all the characters. I just felt like a lot of them made bad decisions without any valid reasoning. And characters can make bad choices, that's fine, but let me as a reader understand the motivations behind them. Also from the romance angle, they just had no chemistry. I just genuinely did not get why these 2 boys were together. And lastly, I felt like the way mental illness was explored in this book was just really weird. Like it was just kind of thrown in as a plot point. For example, one of the boys had OCD throughout his whole life, and then when he transitioned, it just magically disappeared. And I cannot speak for trans people, but I feel like conditions like OCD don't work like that. So overall, this book was actually a huge no for me, which I found really surprising because I read so many good reviews about it online, but I guess it just wasn't my cup of tea. However, the next book was definitely my cup of tea, and that's The Forester's Daughter by Claire Keegan. This is part of Faber Stories, which is a series of short stories written by different authors, and this one's Claire Keegan's one. It's set in rural Ireland, and it follows a forester and his wife, and to be honest, it's actually a bit of a sad story because the couple endure a very silent, loveless marriage full of disappointment and regret. They also have 3 children, all of whom have grown up in the shadows of their unspoken tensions. And this leads the whole family to live a life of loneliness due to trying to upkeep public appearances. However, the secrets they keep begin to unravel when one day the dad finds a dog in the woods and he gifts it as a pet to his eldest daughter. I love Claire Keegan, and once again, she didn't disappoint, and I actually rated this book 4.5 stars. I literally read this book in one sitting, not only because it is short, but it is just really captivating. It's filled with unique imagery and delicate metaphors, and I was genuinely hooked from the first page. The author also possesses this amazing ability to make mundane characters fascinating. Throughout the novella, we follow perspectives from all of the family members, including the dog at one point, which was actually so fun and something I want more in books going forward. Like, I want to hear more perspectives from pets because that was really interesting. I also love the way that this author talks about islands, not just in this book, but throughout all of her other books, including Foster and Small Things Like These. She gives the country of Ireland such a personality. It just feels very raw and desolate, but also filled with such mystery and beauty. Not that Ireland needs it, but this woman is doing incredible PR work for that country. It's just overall a very melancholic tale with a sorrowful ending, but it's incredible and I loved it so much. My only qualm with it, which is the reason I'm not giving it 5 stars, is that I really wanted to hear more from the daughter, especially since the book is literally titled after her. And I thought she would have been a more cool character to explore further as opposed to the parents. But I understand that this book is short, and what the author did with the pages she had was genuinely incredible. I couldn't recommend this book more, and it's perfect for the cold, dark days of winter, so if you're going to read it at any time, I would recommend you read it now. The 4th book I read last month was Franny and Zooey by J.D. Salinger. This is also the author that wrote the very famous classic The Catcher in the Rye. But in this novel, it is actually split into 2 parts. The first is narrated by a college student called Franny, who is basically crashing out to her boyfriend after she realizes how superficial the academia and modern world is. And then the second part of the book is narrated by her older brother Zooey, who is essentially trying to comfort her in this existential crisis. There's no real plot here. The whole of the story is just a series of conversations and mostly arguments between these 2 characters about the state of the world and how Franny is trying to seek solace through religion and spirituality. And I gave this book 3 stars. I liked aspects of this book in the fact that it was quite relatable. I also slip into existential crises when I think about the state of the world for too long, in the fact that it's mostly run by egotistical individuals and modern life feels very superficial. I also like the fact that there was a lot of thought-provoking commentary and a lot of complex topics, which is what this author does very well. And having the book as actually a dialogue, so you can see both sides of these themes explored, was actually a really good writing choice by the author, because you see these opposing views explored by each person, especially in regards to their views on religion, spirituality, enlightenment, and this being a remedy for Franny's discontent. However, I did feel like the second part of the book did drag at times. I felt like the same point was being made multiple times, so we were just going in circles a bit. But the main reason I didn't love this book is just because it just came across as a little bit pretentious. The sister was having the most wild mental breakdown, literally fainting and going on a sort of hunger strike, just because the state of the world just made her feel so ill. Like, come on, it just feels dramatic for no reason. She's a rich, privileged white girl foaming at the mouth at the state of the world while she's having this breakdown in her grand, lavish mansion. I kind of felt like Courtney when Kim loses her earring in the ocean and she's just like, Kim, there's people that are dying.
My diamond earring came off in the ocean and it's gone. And there's people that are dying.
Yes, she does deal with family deaths that are traumatic, but I felt like these deaths weren't really what she was crashing out over in the book, at least in my interpretation. I don't know, crying in your room about the state of the world feels like a luxury only the rich can do, because the majority of people, including myself, still have to go to work and put food on the table whilst having these anxieties. We can't just faint in our room for a week on end. So the end of the book got a bit of an eye roll from me. Like, I liked the commentary in the book and the different sides that were explored, but overall, I just feel like it's not that deep and the characters were just a bit dramatic. The next book I read last month was No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. This is a semi-autobiographical novel that follows a Japanese man struggling to connect with those around him. He feels very detached from people and he feels like he's constantly pretending to be a human being. And he masks this alienation through a clownish facade where he's essentially being a jokey people pleaser. We follow him from childhood to adulthood in this journey of identity and loneliness. He experiences failed relationships, substance abuse, and struggles with his mental health. And just a trigger warning that this book includes some very sensitive subjects, including abuse and suicide. And I gave this book 4 stars. I would describe this guy as a 1940s Japanese Patrick Bateman, just without the murdering girls to feel something part. He doesn't feel the same emotions and thoughts to those around him and therefore feels alienated. So he tries to imitate what other people expect him to be in order to be accepted and preventing being an outcast. Also, the fact that this is autobiographical makes you realize that this is basically the author's own true story, because he actually committed suicide at 38 years old and this book was actually published a month after his death, which made me feel incredibly unsettled whilst reading it because I was like, oh my god, like this was actually someone's someone's real life, and it felt a lot more heavy and powerful. So even though this character is flawed, you can't help but sympathize with him because you kind of do resonate with his despair and loneliness. He's also incredibly honest and vulnerable throughout, and ironically, he does come across as human. This genuinely would have been a perfect book for me if it wasn't for the way he spoke about girls. There's parts where he sleeps with prostitutes and has long-term relationships with other girls, but the way he talks about them and treats them just screams misogynistic incel. Whilst you can argue that may be part of his detached character, it just doesn't sit well with me because he never spoke about men in this way. Even to the men he hated, he still always treated them with respect. But this aside, I really did love the book, and I thought it was fascinating the way the human condition was explored, especially in the way that he had some thoughts that even I've had at one point, and it felt very weirdly relatable. Apart from the fact I love women and would never speak about them in that way. And I also feel like if you are feeling disconnected in society and just feeling generally lost in maybe your 20s or early 30s, then this book is definitely one for you. The next book I read last month was also another Claire Keegan book, and that's Walk the Blue Fields. This is actually a short story collection set against the backdrop of rural Ireland, and all the stories are a little bit sad because they very much focus on themes of loss, longing, betrayal, redemption, etc, etc. But we get a very raw and honest look into the characters of these stories, showcasing how multidimensional they are and their complex relations with other people. And altogether, the book gives a very tender look towards Ireland and its people along with its landscapes, all of which are linked by very raw emotion and layered history. And I gave this book 4 stars. Just a flag that if you wanted to read The Forester's Daughter, it's actually already included in this collection. I had no idea because I read The Forester's Daughter first, but if you like the sound of this book, then just get this one so you don't have to then buy 2 separate books. Short story collections aren't usually my jam, but I really wanted to sink my teeth into this one. It was really good. All the stories were beautiful, distinct, memorable, and a range of experiences and emotions were explored throughout the book. For example, we have yearning through unrequited love, regret for marrying the wrong person, and longing for a child. I've never been to Ireland, but I just love the country and its people, and I felt like this book very much gave me a deeper and more intimate look into its people and laid history and lands. Also, my birthday's on St. Patrick's Day, so I do feel like I have this like weird internal connection with Ireland. Like I just love the country so much. The only reason I'm not giving this 5 stars is because I felt some of the stories were a little bit too open-ended for me. I appreciate that writing consistent, solid endings in short story collections are very hard because you're writing so many stories. But I don't know, if a story doesn't have an absolutely solid ending, I don't end up loving it as much. But this is a solid book though, and I think it's generally one of my favourite short story collections. And finally, the very last book I read last month was Notes on Nationalism by George Orwell. And yes, this is the same author that wrote 1984 and Animal Farm. Nothing like a bit of light reading of political literature to end the year. Am I right, guys? So this is a short book, only around 60 pages, and it contains 3 essays on nationalism, explaining what it is, its difference to patriotism, and the impacts that it has on individuals and society. Orwell's main argument is the fact that nationalism is aggressive and self-centered by nature, which can ultimately distort political and social realities by an individual trying to maintain their nation's superiority. And I gave this book 3.5 stars. Knowing this book was written in 1945, which was 80 years ago, and the majority of its content still being relevant today is mind-boggling. Orwell explores the negative impacts of nationalism very well, such as the fact it leads to irrationality, bias, and moral blindness. In believing one's nation is better than the others can also create division and hostility, which we're seeing in today's politics more than ever, especially with right-wing parties that are inherently more loyal to nationalistic values and tend to be against immigration policies. But it's wild how much of this book stands the test of time with the narratives explored. There's also an interesting essay on how sport can aggravate violence between different nations, especially using football as an example, which is something I've always thought, but I've never been able to articulate why, and I just thought it was very interesting that George Orwell, of all people, wrote this as a short essay. However, I didn't score this book higher because I found all the analysis across 3 essays to be very shallow. For political pieces like this, I feel like you just need more evidence and data to back up what you're saying. Claims need to be backed up in order to be convincing enough an argument. Whereas Orwell would literally cite passing remarks from friends to be sweeping generalizations for the whole nation. For example, he claimed that the whole of the UK in 1945 was anti-Semitic, which to be honest, it probably was in that era. But his only evidence for this was literally writing down 5 or 6 quotes he overheard strangers say. I don't know, the academic girly in me was very much taught that you needed to back up what you were saying by by facts and data. But overall, this was an interesting read. I think you just need to take it with a pinch of salt, and if you very much enjoyed books like 1984 and Animal Farm, I think you would very much enjoy this one. Also, I was unsure whether to include this, but I suppose the very last thing I actually read in 2024 was my journal. At the end of every year, I like to go back on my journal entries of the year and just reflect, see what I've been through, the challenges I've faced, and just how I've grown as a person. And whilst I'm not going to rate this book 5 stars, I thought it'd be interesting to tell you what I liked and disliked about the year. I'm not going to lie, my year actually started off really badly. I felt like I was in a complete flop era. I disliked my job, I was ill and exhausted all the time, and I just had very bad seasonal depression. I felt like I was barely seeing family and friends, and my love life was also just in shambles. My granddad also died in April, and I felt like that was a tipping point of the fact that I needed a big change. Things then got a lot better in May when I handed my notice in at my work and I landed a newer and better job. So I was working a 3-month notice period during the summer, and I just felt like it was the first time in a long time that I could just like chill and enjoy myself. And with the weather getting a lot better, I was just able to defrost and thrive because summer really is my season. I also traveled to 4 places during the summer, including Paris, Cancun, Barcelona, and Marbella. I also just felt genuinely happier, and I was really enjoying life because I was seeing family and friends all the time, and I was also meeting new people. I then started my new job in September, which at first was really stressful and confusing because I actually hate being the new girl anywhere, but I've since settled in and I really like my team and I'm finding the work a lot more manageable. For context, I work in a law firm doing business development, so it's quite a scary big girl corporate job that I'm always like, what the hell am I doing here? I've also had a lot of health issues this year, which has been a bit of a struggle, but I finally had an operation in November to hopefully have sorted it. And lastly, December was really fun because it was full of Christmas festivities. I got to see my family and friends a lot, and I am currently back home for the holidays enjoying myself. So overall, a testing year. It started off in the absolute pits of hell, but it genuinely got better and better, and I am very content where I am right now. But life is all about change and growth. It would be boring if we didn't have any challenges. So here's to an interesting next year. I'm hoping 2025 to be even bigger and better, and I'm hoping the same for you too. And I suppose those are all the books I read in December. Apart from my journal, did you read any of these books? And if so, what did you think of them? And if you didn't read any of these books, what were your highs and lows of 2024? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please drop a like down below. It really helps my channel out and more people can see me yap about books. And if you're new here, why don't you consider subscribing? I make new videos every single Tuesday. You can also follow me on Goodreads where I update what books I'm reading in real time. And you can also follow me on Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post about books as soon as I finish reading them and what they're about and what I rate them out of 10. And thank you so much for watching my final reading wrap up of the year. I will see you next week for a new video. Bye!